Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Victim's Voice. In this episode, I'm going to update you guys on a couple of cases I've covered in the past and talk a little about a well-known trial that is taking place right now. I am still working on the case of Tabitha Shuck Rains, and there is a lot more to the story than I thought, so it's taken me down a rabbit hole. I hope to have it done and out to you guys by next Tuesday. So with that being said, let's jump into some updates. First, let's start with Richard Allen. His name has been all over the internet the past couple of weeks because of a motion that was just granted by the judge presiding over his case. In case you haven't heard of Richard Allen, he faces 2 counts of murder in the deaths of Abby Williams and Libby German in February of 2017 in Delphi, Indiana. He was arrested in late October of 2022, more than 5 years after the murders. Libby had been mindful enough to record the man with her iPhone as he walked toward the girls on the Monon High Bridge. She even got an audio recording of him commanding them to go down the hill after he approached them. Even though they had video and audio of the suspect and 2 sketches, Richard Allen still managed to live in Delphi and even worked at the local CVS for 5 years before being caught. He was hiding in plain sight. If you want to hear the whole story, I covered it back in an earlier episode. Allen has been basically hidden away for safekeeping until his trial begins, under the Safekeeper Statute. They have not been housing him in Carroll County like they normally would someone awaiting trial because of the severity of the charges against him and because of it being a high-profile case. Also, Delphi, where the murders took place, is the county seat of Carroll County. Since November 2022, Allen has been housed at the Westville Correctional Facility in Westville, Indiana. This is about an hour and a half away from Delphi. On April 5th, 2023, an emergency motion was filed from Allen's defense attorneys in which they expressed concerns about their client's deteriorating mental and physical states. His attorneys wrote in the motion, quote, "The conditions under which Mr. Allen has been forced to endure are akin to that of a prisoner of war. They say that Allen, who has a hearing in June, is living in a 6-foot by 10-foot cell, no larger than that of a dog kennel, and sleeping on a pad on a concrete floor." End quote. Here is what else Allen's defense team included in the motion. To further complicate matters, Mr. Allen has suffered depression dating back to early years. Upon his incarceration, Mr. Allen was presumably evaluated and medicated by prison medical staff. Up until the visit with Mr. Allen on April 4th, 2023, counsel for Mr. Allen found him to be polite, communicative, with great eye contact, general responsive to our questions, and exhibiting good sense of humor on occasion in spite of his false arrest and circumstances. However, Mr. Allen's deteriorating physical condition has been observed by counsel dating back to the beginning of the new year. As recently as March 24th, 2023, attorney Andrew Baldwin met with Mr. Allen with optimistic news about the direction of the case. Mr. Allen was inquisitive about the information, was thankful for the information, and was optimistic about the information. Only 10 days later, on April 3rd, 2023, attorneys for Mr. Allen observed a steep decline in Mr. Allen's demeanor, ability to communicate, ability to comprehend, and ability to assist in his defense. Simply put, this version of Richard Allen was a very different version than counsel for Mr. Allen had interacted with over the course of the last 5 months. Mr. Allen appeared to be suffering from very psychotic symptoms, which counsel would describe as schizophrenic and delusional. Counsel further believes that on April 4th, 2023, interaction, Mr. Allen seems to be suffering from memory loss and is demonstrating an overall inability to communicate rationally with counsel and family members. Counsel experienced these symptoms firsthand when visiting Mr. Allen on Monday, April 4th, 2023. End quote. They didn't include in the motion what was actually happening to lead them to make the assumption of schizophrenic and psychotic behavior. What behaviors was he exhibiting? The terms they used are very different things. For example, schizophrenia is a condition, not a symptom of something. So what were his symptoms? What did they consider to be psychotic behavior? It seems they were throwing these terms around very loosely. Also, these are lawyers, not mental health professionals. So how can they make these determinations without Allen being evaluated by a licensed professional? Also, in my opinion, Allen was already suffering from a psychotic break when he decided to viciously murder two little girls who were enjoying a walk in the trails. I don't believe being in prison caused it. Also, I'm really not concerned if he is comfortable in jail. I actually hope he is very uncomfortable and miserable. He wasn't thinking of how those little girls felt when he attacked them, so why should we care how cushy he has it in jail? These are just my opinions, since he is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Judge Gall, however, did grant the motion for Allen to be moved. The document stated, quote, consistent with that order and the Safekeeper statute, the Department of Corrections is authorized to move the defendant within the Department of Corrections to accommodate his medical and physical needs pursuant to medical directives by the Department of Correction physicians, psychiatrists, or psychologists. Well, Mr. Allen, I hope the next place is just as uncomfortable for you. I hope you are suffering just as you caused Libby and Abby to suffer, just as you caused both of their families to suffer. Next, we are going to move to Colorado Springs, Colorado, where the trial for Letecia Stauch to determine if she was insane at the time she brutally murdered her stepson, 11-year-old Gannon Stauch, is taking place as we speak. I haven't covered this case yet. I'm going to wait until the trial is completely over before I do a full episode. But I need to tell you about this trial and the audacity of Letecia Stauch. In case you haven't heard of Gannon Stauch or his evil stepmother, Letecia Stauch, I'm going to give you a brief recap of what this case entails. The Stauch family was living in Colorado Springs, Colorado, when in late January of 2020, Gannon Stauch was reported as a runaway by his stepmother. His dad, Albert, was out of town for work with the National Guard. Letecia called 911 at 6:55 p.m. and told the dispatcher that Gannon had went to a friend's house and never came back home. When the officers arrived and asked the name of the friend and to show them which house he went to, Letecia said she couldn't remember. This was the first of many lies Letecia would be caught telling, and she almost immediately quit cooperating with the police. The police didn't believe Letecia from the beginning. They started digging into her and found some of her Google searches that talked about hating her stepkids and looking for a new man with no kids. Also, when she came to the station to be questioned, she brought her own notes to read and didn't want to answer any of the detectives' questions. When she found out they wanted a sample of her DNA, she started shoving the Kleenex she had been using down her pants and faking chest pains to get sent to the hospital. The detectives decided then that they were on the right track. Albert took the next flight home from Oklahoma, and Gannon's biological mom, Landon, came into town also, and she and Albert became united in the search for Gannon. After some suspicious behavior and catching Letecia in some lies, both Albert and Landon started suspecting that she might have done something to Gannon. Landon was staying at the Stauch home, which Letecia was not happy about at all. So 2 days after Gannon went missing, she moved out, taking her 17-year-old daughter Harley with her. She traveled cross country to go stay with family in South Carolina. The FBI had placed a GPS monitoring system on her car to keep track of her. Around a month and a half after going missing, Gannon was found dead in a suitcase underneath a bridge overpass 1,300 miles away from Colorado Springs in Florida. Letecia had checked into a hotel just 3 miles away from where he was found on her trip to South Carolina. She was arrested soon after on March 2nd, 2020. During transport from South Carolina to Colorado Springs, while in the Kansas area, Letecia attacked an officer that was sitting beside her in the vehicle. She wiggled out of her cuffs, grabbed an energy drink can, and bashed the officer in the head with it. She then tried to open the door of the vehicle and jump out while on a busy highway. When they pulled over to detain her, she said the officer had been running her mouth, which is why she hit her. She also said she wasn't trying to escape. She was just trying to get some fresh air. Because opening a door on a vehicle going 70 miles an hour is, of course, the best way to get fresh air. Later on, Letecia would say that it was one of her multiple personalities that hit the officer in the van that day. Over the last 3 years, Letecia has changed her plea, asked to defend herself, and anything else she could think of to postpone the start of the trial. However, just last month, the trial began. She asked if she could not be present for the trial, but the judge made her sit there and listen to every word, even when she acted up to try to get kicked out, which we will talk about in a minute. The plea she is going with is guilty by reason of insanity, and her defense team is trying to go with saying that she has dissociative identity disorder, or DID. The trial is now on its 18th day. The prosecution has over 150 witnesses to call. First, I'm going to go over a few things we have learned so far. In 2 days, February 14th and 15th of 2020, Letecia told a few different stories of what had happened to Gannon. She shared these stories with Albert over the course of several phone calls that were being recorded by the police. Her first story was when the police had shown up on the 27th when she had reported Gannon missing. An intruder named Eduardo was still in the house, as was Gannon. She had hired Eduardo from somewhere in her neighborhood where he was working on another house. She asked him to come and fix the carpet that had been burnt by Gannon knocking over a candle. She gave him the code to the garage, and she left then to run errands. When she returned, he was still in the house and assaulted and raped her repeatedly. She said Gannon was calling him Uncle Matt and eventually left with him. Her next story is that a man named Quincy Brown followed her from Petco, where she had been with Gannon, and at some point was laying in the middle of the road in front of her car. When Letecia stopped to avoid running over him, he jumped into her car and made her take him home and raped her. She knew his name because while he was assaulting her, his ID fell out of his pocket and she read it. Another story was that Letecia and Gannon were near County Line Road and Highway 105 in northern El Paso County on January 27th of 2020. Gannon was riding a bicycle in the area and fell off and hit his head. He was then abducted by Quincy Brown. Here are some other things we have learned during the trial so far. During an appointment with a mental health professional, Letecia said she had named her different personalities names from the movie Twilight. There was Jasper and Edward, and she even mentioned the vampire council, the Volturi, from the movie. She also said there is a button in her cell that summons them. She is really putting it on thick for the doctors. They showed interrogation videos in the courtroom during week 3 of the trial. Letecia had some new stories to tell detectives. First, Letecia said a pregnant woman was standing on the side of the road, so Letecia stopped to help her. When she got in the car, she took off her fake pregnancy belly and showed Letecia that it was full of cash. She then told Letecia she had to help her launder money from a Mexican restaurant. The lady then kidnapped Gannon. The next story she told during an interrogation is a real doozy. She said while Eduardo, who was the construction worker in the first story, was still in the house, for some reason he let her walk down into the basement, with him following her, of course. She looked into Gannon's room and seen something large and tall wearing a cape, so she grabbed Eduardo's gun from him and shot it. She then realized it was Gannon, standing on his bed, wearing a blanket like a cape. She put him in the car, I have no idea where Eduardo was at this time, and drove around town looking for the person who could bring people back to life, but she couldn't find him. During this time, she said she was the personality of Maria, even though in earlier interviews she had said Maria was the protector of the children. Oh, and she also said she doesn't believe Tupac is dead either. On February 18th, Letecia calls a company called FakePolygraph.com, hoping to get the results of a test that she took sent back to her, but is told her report was blocked by management based on the content of the questions, according to the affidavit. She is also told by an employee that with illegal activities, they reserve the right to not send the report. They were questions that had to do with murdering your stepson, so they refused to send her the results. So Letecia asked, quote, "What do you do now? Just delete it and go on about life and keep the money?" The employee answered, "Yes, we do indeed." Now, about the trial. First, the defense team, by the sounds of the opening statements, they don't want to be the ones defending her. Defense attorney Will Cook opened with some theatrics, pointing to how most people already find his client guilty or evil. Cook then pretended to walk out of the courtroom, acting defeated, before returning to say he can't just check out now because it wouldn't be fair to Miss Stauch. He rattled on in a monotone voice without making much sense or really saying much at all. Throughout the trial, they have sat at the defense table looking bored and like they would rather be anywhere else. Often they are sitting with their heads in their hands as if the whole thing is giving them a headache, or leaning back in their chairs looking up at the ceiling as if to say, "Why me?" All while their client is sitting there acting like a Looney Tune. Now we will talk about Letecia's behavior in the courtroom. Audacity must have been on sale this year because Letecia Stauch had plenty of it. Most of the time, she is sitting with her head hanging down and hair hanging in her face like Cousin It. It appears her lawyers have given her suggestions on trying to look the crazy part. She has actually laid her head down on the table for long periods of time like she's bored out of her mind and can't stay awake. At one point, she had her head resting on her hand and her arm slid off the table as though she actually fell asleep. She would do this any time they were talking about Gannon or what she did to him. She is showing complete disrespect to Albert Landon and everyone who loved Gannon. However, when one of the mental health professionals took the stand and was being cross-examined by her attorneys, Letecia sat straight up and was all ears. "I have watched 18 days of this trial, and this is the first time she has seemed interested in what was being said, because of course it was about her." Both mental health professionals that have testified so far have concluded that Letecia does not have DID, but instead has borderline and narcissistic personality disorders. She has displayed problems with bragging and a feeling of entitlement. Letecia has also been caught by the jury flipping the middle finger to the witnesses as they took the stand. She would try at times to hide she was doing it by, rubbing the middle finger on her cheek or something like that, but eventually didn't try to hide it anymore at all and was waving that finger around like it was a flag. The jury even wrote to the judge and asked if they are supposed to take into consideration her actions when they try to reach a verdict. The judge told Letecia if she didn't start showing respect, that he was going to handcuff her hands underneath the table so that she couldn't move them at all. He said he could also remove her from the courtroom, but it would just be for the day and in a holding cell down the hall. They would bring her back in the next morning to see if she had changed her behavior. She sat there with a grin on her face like she didn't have a care in the world. Letecia has also sported many looks throughout this trial. I will post pics on my Facebook page. It seems each personality she claims to have has a different hairstyle. In my opinion, this is just another thing she is doing to sway the jury into believing she has DID. She seems to think this whole trial is a joke. She shows no remorse for anything she has done to that sweet little 11-year-old boy that she viciously murdered. Do you think the jury will find her insane, or will they see through her games and see her for the evil person she is? After the trial is over, I will cover this case in its entirety. It's looking like it might be as soon as next week that we will get a verdict. Next, we're moving to Idaho. The defense attorneys for Brian Kohlberg are working on building their case. What they want to happen, however, is beyond crazy. First of all, if you don't know who Brian Kohlberger is, then you can go back and listen to my episode on the Idaho murders that I released a couple of months ago. To give you a brief overview of the case, Brian Kohlberger is accused of murdering 4 Idaho State University students in November of last year. He came into their house in the middle of the night and brutally stabbed the 4 students as they lay in their beds. 2 roommates survived, and one of them opened her bedroom door when she heard noises and seen the killer walk by her bedroom on his way out of the house. He was dressed in black with a black mask covering his face. The other roommate saw and heard nothing. She was on the first floor, where Kohlberg never entered. He was only on the second and third floors. After watching doorbell cams, surveillance cams from the college, and a thorough investigation, authorities arrested Kohlberger at his parents' home in Pennsylvania at the end of December this past year in 2022. He has pled not guilty and is awaiting trial. Recent media outlets have confirmed that Kohlberger's attorneys have asked a Nevada court for Bethany Funk to travel to Idaho and testify as a witness for Kohlberger on June 26th at a preliminary hearing. Funk, of course, does not want to appear and is fighting the subpoena through her own lawyer. Bethany Funk is the roommate that was asleep on the first floor when the murders took place. According to the defense, Funk has information that could prove Kohlberger's innocence. Funk's attorney filed a motion arguing that there was, quote, no further information or detail pertaining to the substance of the testimony or the alleged exculpatory information of Miss Funk or why it would be entertained at a preliminary hearing, end quote. Funk's lawyer also argues that Nevada law requires a hearing before the subpoena could be issued. There was no hearing. The prosecution feels it is unlawful to try to force her from her home and back to Idaho to testify for the defendant, who is accused of breaking into her home at the time and murdering her friends. They feel it is a mechanism of the defenses to see what cards the state is holding. In Idaho, there is a grand jury that could simply indict him, yet they have allowed this preliminary hearing to proceed. They also stated it is against the U.S. Constitution to try to bring someone from one state to another. However, there is a uniform act that will allow it in criminal cases, but it doesn't cover preliminary hearings. You also have to explain to the court where she lives why you have to have that witness come to the court in another state. They have to show that she actually has information that is useful to the case, not just say, I believe it will help my client. In my opinion, this poor girl has already been through enough. How dare they try to put her through any more trauma? Funk says she never saw the killer and she doesn't feel like she knows anything that would help show that Kohlberger didn't do this heinous crime. Her version of what happened remains sealed, so how does the defense know that she has information that could exonerate Kohlberger? She isn't the roommate that saw the figure in the house that night that was clad in black. It was Dylan Mortison who saw him that night. In my opinion, the defense is grasping at straws and doesn't care if they continue to traumatize an innocent victim. I will continue to update on this as it gets closer to Kohlberger's preliminary hearing. That's all I have for today. I will be back next week. Until then, take care and be safe.